Hi, and welcome back to Lisa's Stamp Studio. A one-sheet wonder gives you an idea on where to cut the designer series paper so you can make multiple cards from one sheet. Today, I'm going to be doing just that with a piece of 6x6 designer series paper. Keep in mind, we're going to be making 7 cards with one piece of 6x6 paper. So if you have a 12x12 sheet of designer series paper, that means you'll be able to make 28 cards. Now, today is also a 2-in-1. Not only is it a one-sheet wonder, these cards are square, 4 1/4 by 8 1/2, and then folded. And each one is explicitly different than the other one. We're going to be using both sides of the double-sided designer series paper to give you lots of variety. Down in the video description below, you'll find a link, and there that will lead you over to the pictures, cutting dimensions, and the template for today's one-sheet wonder. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's project. I'm going to be using my Stampin' trimmer to do the cutting. It has both a scoring and a cutting blade. They navigate up as well as down and out of the way, so you can keep them on the track at the exact same time. It also has an extension arm so that you can cut those longer pieces of designer paper or cardstock. My designer series paper comes from the package called Playing with Patterns, and you'll find this in the annual catalog. And like most of the Stampin' Up! Designer papers, they are double-sided, giving you lots of variety. Now, oftentimes, one-sheet wonders are actually created with designer series paper that have very detailed and beautiful patterns. So that all you have to do is add a simple greeting. But today I wanted to expound on that because these other designer series papers with more subtle prints oftentimes are a little bit more challenging to use when you're using a template like this. Let's start by cutting this into the 7 pieces. We're going to line this up in the trimmer at the very first mark, which is 2 1/2 inches. There's a straight edge here along the top to make sure that your paper is nice and straight. Once we have our 2 1/2 inch set, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut. This piece now we are going to turn and we are going to cut another piece at 2 1/2 inches. That is going to leave us now a 3 1/2 inch piece here. This is the piece we're going to cut on a diagonal. Now the easiest way to do that is to gauge the black strip here on your cutting track. You're going to take one tip here at the top and one tip here at the bottom, and you can navigate this paper so that those tips are aligned within that cutting track. Once they're properly aligned, I'm holding the paper here, and then we're just going to slice, and that's going to give us these 2 triangles. The remainder that we have here, we are going to cut this next strip at 1 3/4 inch. We're going to turn it, and we're going to cut one piece at 4, and that's going to leave us a 2-inch piece. The piece that's left is 1 1/2 inches wide, and we're going to turn this, and we're going to cut this at 1 3/4 inch. And again at 1 3/4 inch. That then will leave us with a 1 3/4 by 3-inch piece here. Now we have a total of 7 pieces for 7 cards. You might recall in the introduction that I said all 7 cards are going to be square today. So this has been cut 4 1/4 by 8 1/2. I did score it in half at 4 1/4 right before you joined me. I'm using that bone folder for a nice crisp edge. I've got my score line here at the top, and this is one of the triangle pieces of designer series paper. I chose this piece specifically because oftentimes viewers tell me that these are the most challenging shapes for them to work with on a one-sheet wonder or on a layout. I'm going to be using this beautiful die from the Friendly Silhouettes. This has an accompanying stamp set called Friend Like You, and I use this stamp set on all of the cards that I'm creating with you today. I wanted to play up some beautiful rainbow glimmer paper. This paper comes in a 12x12 sheet, but I want to show you how I creatively cut this to incorporate my die. I knew I wanted to work with the colors in my designer series paper, so I wanted to gravitate towards the purple shades here. So I cut these into panels, allowing me to access just this area here. Now the glimmer paper is not only stunning in a beautiful rainbow or ombre look, but it's quite thin, which is going to allow you to die cut very, very easily. In addition to that, you're going to notice it's not messy at all. I went ahead and I placed my die right on top, and then I passed this through my die cutting machine. And that left me with this. The dies are conveniently sized, so they'll fit a standard card, which is 5 1/2 inches across. So naturally, this is going to be bigger than what we need. And I wanted some visual interest, so I decided to put this on an angle. I'm going to gravitate this further to the right side. Now let me talk with you about how I adhered that here to attach this to the card base. I'm using the Stampin' CO+. This is a very strong adhesive, and one of the reasons I really love it is it has small tabs of adhesive as it comes out. So you're able to control the length a lot easier. I'm going to place adhesive right here along the very bottom. This blue area will not be visible. And I'm placing little tiny dashes. The silicone craft sheet here underneath is going to protect my work surface since adhesive, liquid glue, and hot glue will not stick to it. I'll take this angled piece of designer series paper and I'm going to gravitate this to kind of cover up some of that blue area here at the bottom. Once you're happy with the placement, all you have to do is press in place, and that's going to tack these two pieces together. I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to cut right along the designer series paper, and I'm going to cut away what I don't want. Then I'm going to turn it and do the exact same thing on this side, following the direction of this paper. More than likely, you're going to end up with some of your pattern hanging over the end. So what I recommend that you do is you just come in and you give it a little bit of a snip so that it looks purposeful on where it's ended. Let's work on the greeting for the card base next. Since I wanted to mimic these colors, I decided to use the Blackberry Bliss ink pad. I know this is a highly pigmented ink and it can be very, very dark. So I'm going to bring in a piece of scratch paper here, which is one of the small grid sheets, because when I ink up my stamp, I'm actually going to stamp off a layer of this pigmentation on the scratch paper. I'm going to stamp that here. That's going to reduce the shade. And then what I'm going to do is add this here in the upper right corner. Now you might notice that the photopolymer has been stained from that ink pad. Highly pigmented colors will do that, but it will not affect the stamp, even if you decide to go to a lighter shade. I have cleaned the stamp, and you can see here that there's no pigmentation left behind. I'm going to be adding this now to the card base, and I'm going to flip that over. I'll be using my full-size dimensionals. I'm going to position them so they're going to be outside the vantage point of that angle. And I'm going to use them generously because I want to make sure that this panel is not going to sag when my card goes through the mail. I'm going to use my Take Your Pick tool with the paper piercing tool attachment, which is going to easily allow me to remove those paper backings. This now will get adhered in the lower right-hand corner of the card base. I opted not to tack these down because I wanted that 3D dimensional look to my card, but I did decide to add some embellishments, and these are the butterfly gems. They come in an array of colors. There are glue dots already on the back, which makes them very easy to use. So I'll pick up one of those here, and I'll add one here near the bottom left, and I'm adding another one here below the greeting on a slightly different angle. It's very simple, but a very pretty card. Now let me show you the other cards I created with the pieces that we just cut. Our next card uses the other triangle corner that we have here. All I did was flip the designer paper over. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the image and about the greeting because you're going to notice that there's a variation from the stamp set. I have a piece of Whisper White cardstock here just to give you the demonstration. I'm using Coastal Cabana ink for those stems, and I've stamped those here. And I used that specifically because it coordinated with the designer series paper. Then I chose to use the crushed curry for the same reason, and those are for the cattails. Now you'll notice when I ink this up that there's only 3 cattails on this image. Those get positioned here. But you're probably wondering how I filled the others in. Make sure you clean your stamp. Because the images are separated, you're able to ink just one of the outside images very, very easily. And that allowed me to come in and mimic the cardstock and the stems and fill in the cattails that I desired until I achieved the desired look. Now let's talk about the greeting. The stamp actually says, and everything else will work out, but I didn't feel that that was appropriate from the outside of my card since it started with the word and. So I did some masking on this stamp. Now there's 2 ways you actually can do this. The first would be to turn this over and use a dye-based marker to color in just the words that you choose. However, I noticed that when I do that on photopolymer stamps that I often don't have the intensity of the color that I really, really wanted. So let me show you a great card making hack. Tear off 2 pieces of household tape and fold back the edges on one side. Cover up the words that you want omitted. In this case, it's going to be the word and the word else. I'm being very careful to make sure that I'm not covering up the other words inside this stamp. I'm going to bring over my Night of Navy ink, which coordinates with that designer series paper. You have to pull off the tape, and then this now will get stamped here on the cardstock. That will leave you just the greeting that you desired. Our third card is stamped right on the designer series paper, and I stamped those adorable dragonflies that are part of the stamp set. I chose to put my greeting in a saffron colored cardstock circle to mimic the sun. Those 2 small designer series panels, I cut 2 pieces of cardstock to coordinate. I used Versamark ink from that same stamp set for this card, and some of the beautiful Playing with Patterns ribbon combination. This card uses a layer of vellum over the polka dot pattern, which is the reverse side of this one. And again, I use those beautiful butterfly gems. Our sixth card adds a simple panel on this side, and I use those dies once again, but I use the cattail image here and the gems. And then finally, for our seventh card, I used that small piece of designer series paper along this image here and added some gems to it to make it look intentional. It's also a wonderful place for you to house some ribbon. I would love to know which of these is your favorite. And make sure you head over to lisastampstudio.com and you search the July 15th blog post for the template for these cards, as well as the pictures and their individual cutting dimensions. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and you are interested in receiving a copy of the current catalog, you can request one over at lisastampstudio.com. If you have enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It certainly helps. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.